We are back with the second episode of our conference preview. Last week we previewed the ACC. This week we also have a special guest. CFBudge is here. If you haven't seen him, he's on TikTok, Instagram, your YouTube, Twitter, all social media. But I know I originally found you on TikTok. You got a pretty big following. A lot of great content on TikTok. So if you're not following him already, you need to go make sure you follow him. All sorts of great stuff. But appreciate you joining us for preview the Big 12.
Yeah, Jake, William, thanks for having me on. Absolute pleasure to be here. I always say it whenever I'm on any college football podcast. I just love talking about college football, so I'm very happy to be here.
You're in the right place then.
Yeah. So we're wanting to bring you on for the Big 12 because last week I saw you at Big 12 Media Days. The Big 12 is definitely one of the most interesting conferences this year, so kind of with everybody, with all of the movement around. But when you look at that, you've got Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, and Colorado joining. And your initial impressions, what do you think of the four teams moving into the Big 12 this year? And also with Texas and Oklahoma out.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just makes it even more exciting because Texas, Oklahoma, I think those were two clearly top tier programs in the Big 12 year in and year out. Taking them, removing them, and then bringing in schools like you just mentioned, the Arizona schools, Colorado and Utah. Really intriguing stuff. I think Utah can genuinely come in and be a top rung Big 12 team right off the bat. And then I think it's just going to be really interesting figuring out where those other three schools end up, because it's been a long time since we've seen schools move from a power conference to another one. So actually seeing where teams fit in the ladder is going to be interesting compared to like last year when you saw like Houston, Cincinnati, BYU, right, going to the Big 12. They all came in a little bit lower, which is as expected for like a group of five power conference move. But I think the real intrigue comes from the fusion of power conferences almost.
Don't you think it's strange that Utah, it seems like more of a Big Ten team and they somehow end up in this Big 12 package? Do you know why maybe they would end up in the Big 12 and not the Big 10?
The truth is that no one really knows what's going on in realignment, and anyone that pretends to know is crazy. And I have failed to see anybody accurately predict. I mean, I see all the Clemson gear on you. Clemson's getting talked about in Big 12 noise right now as well. So it's something that I don't know if it's possible to predict. I know I've heard the tremors that Utah's disgruntled. They feel like they're more of a Big 10 caliber university, but there's so much that goes into it and so much that's not football related that it can be a little frustrating sometimes, but it is one of those things, where it's like, why does anything happen in realignment?
Yeah, Utah, I think, is one of the really interesting programs because they were at the top of the Pac-12. 2 years ago, they won the conference championship over USC and Caleb Williams. And most of that team is still somehow intact because Cam Rising basically just took the year off last year. He was a game time decision in the first few weeks and then decided that he was no longer a game time decision. And after about the fourth week and decided that he was just going to wait for this year. I think with Utah is an interesting team because they have been so consistent. You know what you're going to get out of Utah and that they're not going to be a 7 or 8 win team. They are almost certainly going to be a 9, 10, 11 win team year after year because Kyle Whittingham has just built that program.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, last year you saw rock bottom for the Utes, and it was having a pig farmer at quarterback, and even he wasn't healthy, and yet they somehow still squeezed 8 wins out of that. And I just don't see any path where they finish with less than that this year, especially with the lack of clear tier 1 teams in the Big 12. It feels like anyone could beat anyone, and a team like Utah could thrive in an environment in a conference like that just because of how consistent and well built it is there, like you just said. So
yeah, and I think Kyle Whittingham doesn't get enough credit. I mean, the guy, like you said, took a pig farmer and still won a bunch of games. And like you're saying, he's the epitome of success and consistency. He's competing against USC, UCLA, Oregon, Washington State for his recruits. And now with NIL and social media, I mean, we've seen college football recruiting transform from where your Southeastern guys don't really lead the Southeast. Your Northeastern guys don't really lead the Northeast. Now guys are going everywhere. So Utah is competing against everybody, especially in their own backyard, and they're still able to win. And I think that just speaks just huge sounds on the culture that he's built there. And, that's why I don't think they match the Big 12 mentality, because they're not a team that, just throws the football 1,000 times a game. They're going to run the football. They're going to play a physical brand of football. And, nothing against the Big 12, but that's just not what you're used to seeing. You're used to seeing the standard no defense, high scoring, high flying offenses like you'd see in Arizona. And Jake and CFBudge, I don't know, what y'all think about this, but I think post Jeff Fisher in Arizona is going to be just as wild as it was with what he had started to build. I don't think they're going to miss a beat this year.
Yeah, with Arizona, I definitely think offensively they're still going to be pretty potent. I really love the new staff they brought in there. I don't know if you guys caught it, but Dino Babers is their new offensive coordinator, the former Syracuse.
I love Dino Babers.
So, really love that pairing there. And I think Brent Brennan is obviously a pretty underrated coach for what he did at San Jose State. What I'm concerned about just this year is, and I was so high on Arizona, if that Arizona team stayed intact, I mean, that's a top 10 team this year. But I'm concerned because they lost like 8 transfers, key guys on that defensive front. And to me, that was the biggest difference between that 5-6 win Jed Fish Arizona team and that insane 11-10 win Jed Fish team. So I'm just going to be really intrigued to see how Arizona manages the defensive side of the ball, but maybe that'll make them blend in perfectly with the Big 12, like you said earlier, with no defense.
And their offense won't miss a beat. Yeah, go ahead.
Their
Jake.
offense was one of the best in the country. Nobody really expected them to have an explosive offense like they did. And then there was a lot of assumptions that when Jed Fish left, that they were all just going to go up to Washington because Washington was replacing basically a whole team. Everybody was either leaving in the transfer portal or to follow Kalen DeBoer, or they were all graduated, like the whole offensive line, and were going to the NFL draft. Like they were just replacing everybody. So everybody kind of assumed that they'd all follow Jed Fish. And then when Noah Fafita just stays, everybody just stays put as well and gives Brent Brennan a really good starting spot that, Jed Fish didn't have that. Jed Fish had walked into a terrible situation, and Brent Brennan gets to walk into a much improved situation compared to what Jed Fish did. I want to talk about the other team. Well, the other main team, Arizona State. I apologize. I just don't really care about Arizona State. They're not going to be that good this year.
Hey, I graduated from Arizona State. Put some respect on their name.
Good for you. Good for you.
You actually went to class? People at Arizona State go to class?
Oh, no, I didn't attend a single class, but I graduated.
Yeah, I figure that if you can party hard enough, you do well enough at Arizona State.
Yeah, exactly. I had a roommate that went to Arizona State, and he didn't last very long. They sent him. His parents were like, "Hey, your decisions are making us send you back to the East Coast," and he ended up coming to Clemson.
That's tough.
I'm surprised we lasted this long without talking about Coach Prime in Colorado, because
who
they are, sweeping the nation. Travis Hunter, Shadur Sanders, Coach Prime. I mean, last year they were the talk of the town. They still are, moving to a different conference. I mean, EA Sports puts them in like the top 20 teams, but every other preview magazine has them going like maybe 500. And don't get me wrong, I think we all know that Shadur Sanders is a good quarterback. Travis Hunter is really good. But did they do anything really in the offensive or defensive line to really help them? Because Travis Hunter called out his offensive line the other day while streaming, and they didn't really.
Last year's,
they really get any better?
They definitely made some moves to it remains to be seen whether or not the moves will be good, but they did the only thing that Coach Prime knows how to do, which is use the portal. They have an entirely new offensive line. Like, everyone is new. They have 5 new offensive line starters. I even saw in the notes, Dayan Hayes is a guy they brought in the defensive front from Pitt. That's a pretty solid addition. So I think they have new faces, and they have a few proven guys, but new faces doesn't always translate to better. The way I've talked about Colorado and the way I talked about them in my preview mag is they are just a slightly better version of last year's team. I still think their depth has many questions because of Deion's refusal to recruit. They just don't have that full class of solid recruits. Instead, they have a really wavering, fluky boom or bust portal class. So I don't know what to think of Colorado. I think it's really fun that they're in the Big 12, though, because the variance in discourse that could happen with all those close games against similarly tiered teams, I think is going to be absolutely hilarious. Like, if Colorado starts 4-0 again, like, come on, that'll be so fun.
I love that. But I will say, like, one thing that I want to key on is the most important thing you said is all 5 offensive line starters are new. And to break that down a little further, they've never played with one another. And one of the most important things of playing of offensive line is that unity and knowing what the guy next to you is going to be doing. And, I don't care if you get 5 guys who are good starters at other places. If they've never played together, we're going to see growing pains. And, it's not like they start off the year with a cupcake. Yes, it's an FCS school, but it's North Dakota State. And, out of all teams in the FCS, that's not who you want to have on your first week. And another thing, too, is like when you're talking about Colorado, they're very polarizing. But a team that's in the ACC that's very similar to Colorado is Florida State, and in the sense that they use the transfer portal so heavily. And either of y'all, do you know why? I mean, I guess Dion brings his own baggage, his Louis baggage, in terms of media perception. But why is Colorado viewed as like, no one can, people are just going to say they're terrible, and people are going to say Florida State's going to be great. But honestly, I don't know where either team's going to fall because you have no idea what these guys are going to do together.
That's an interesting point because Florida State does routinely dip into the portal and use the portal, and it's one of their building blocks for success under Norvell has been portal. But what I will say, it's true for Florida State. It's true for teams like Ole Miss, for another example. Using the portal as a supplemental tool, and yes, sometimes those numbers can get big. They're bringing in 20-plus guys or whatever, but they at least have a solid bed of recruiting. Like Florida State's consistently been like at least top 25 to top 20 in recruiting under him. So having that solid foundation, bedrock, and then having exceptionally good staff and being good at scouting and knowing which guys you want in your team. What I will say about the Noles is I think they're leaning a little heavier on the portal this year than they typically have. And that's because of all the guys we just saw go out the door for them. I mean, they had so many opt-ins last year. It's only the natural progression. So that's a valid point. And I think this year, if Florida State starts to struggle and we start to see them have sort of a 2023 Clemson type season where nothing can go their way, I think that could totally be something to point to is they relied on the portal a little too heavy.
Too soon. I haven't got to Duke yet. Ready to talk about 2023.
I am really excited for Colorado because I live in Columbus, Ohio, so I saw Dallin Hayden plenty over the last couple of years, and Dallin Hayden was an electric running back. I always thought Ryan Day should have played him more, especially when last year he came out and basically said he was redshirting him, just knowing he was probably going to leave. But the question is, without a good offensive line, a great running back can only do so much if his offensive line opens no holes for him. I think Dallin Hayden can be a useful and a good running back. They had Dylan Edwards last year, but was a true freshman. Now they get a little bit more of an experienced running back who went against some tough Big Ten defenses, throughout his last 2 years in different spot starts. So I'd love to see him actually go and have success because I think he could be a very valuable piece to make that offense really go.
The thing I like the least about Colorado this year is something they did last year. They demoted Sean Lewis, their offensive coordinator, and then Sean Lewis this offseason gets the head coach job at San Diego State because he's a great coach. And so I think they were playing the blame game last year with him, and I think that's a horrible mistake. He was the best coordinator they could have had and a guy that could have had a head coaching job elsewhere and proved it. So that's the main reason I'm not crazy. I believe Pat Shurmur is their OC, and they've talked about how he has a great relationship with Shador and stuff, but I'm just not exactly buying them for specifically that reason.
I think he's bringing in NFL guys, and it seems like, the old mantra was, hey, get to the college game so you could get to the NFL game. And then the college coaches normally don't pan out. I mean, you have your Pete Carrolls and Jim Harbaugh had some success, but you don't see that very often. But now we're seeing these NFL coaches come back. Like Pat Shurmur has some success in the NFL. I'm curious to see what that looks like, and can an NFL coach relate to the college game like they can, like vice versa. So I'm curious to see that. And I'm also curious about that defense because that defense was putrid last year. Shador Sanders was able to put up ungodly numbers, but that's because they had to throw the ball 1,000 times a game. And I'm curious to see if that defense gives them a fighter's chance in any of these games. I mean, no offense to Colorado State, but Colorado State was not a great football team last year, and they go into double overtime with them, and that was one of their wins, was coming back against Colorado State. So I think if the hype is going to start after they beat North Dakota State, and then I forget who they have week 2, but
they have Nebraska second week, so there will be some.
We're going to find out what they're made of.
Game.
Right? Yeah, we'll find out what they're made of week 2, and I'm pretty sure it's in Colorado though. So Is it in Colorado, Jake? Do you know?
I believe it's in Lincoln, Nebraska this
It's
year.
in Lincoln.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So
we're
they
gonna
got to go on
find
the road.
out. We're gonna find out who they are week 2 pretty quickly, because I think what Matt Rule's got going on over there in Nebraska is huge. I mean, we've seen what Matt Rule can do in the coaching realm. Speaking of college coaches going to the NFL, but another thing that happened a lot with Colorado is the injury bug, and I think another team that, when you think injury bug, is definitely Kansas, and that Jaden Daniels at quarterback. If Jaden Daniels stays healthy this entire season, what is their ceiling?
Well, Jalen Daniels with an L.
Sorry,
You're referring to the Heisman Trophy winner, but I'll allow it because he was a Sun Devil. Jalen Daniels he's an absolute beast. It's been so sad. I think the last 2 years he only played in at 5 games maximum. If he can stay healthy this year, I really think Kansas's ceiling is a Big 12 title. And I think the linear fashion in which the Jayhawks have improved year to year under Leipold has been pretty startling to watch. And at many times, especially last season, you could tell there was a spark that team had when he was on the field and when he was playing. Hilariously, I think last year when Kansas was playing Oklahoma, I picked Kansas to beat Oklahoma, but then they announced that Jalen Daniels was going to be out with an injury. So I was like, oh, I changed my mind. I pick Oklahoma. I'm not picking Kansas. And then Kansas still pulled the upset. So that was a funny tidbit. But I definitely think if Daniels stays healthy, if you could guarantee me he's healthy for a whole year, I would feel that much more confident putting them in the Big 12 title conversation and in that game.
Yeah. Last year they had a safety net with Jason Bean because he had been there for 5 years or whatnot and had experience coming in and playing. This year that Jason Bean's gone. So if Jalen Daniels doesn't play, they're looking at more inexperience. So I love Jalen Daniels. I am probably one of his biggest fans, and I will continue to be that as long as he continues to play. I think Jalen Daniels has a serious chance to be a Heisman sleeper this year. But like you said, the big thing is if he plays. If he doesn't play 11 games, there's no chance. If he plays a full season, I think the chance of Kansas should have a really special season, is absolutely possible. The schedule sets up well. They have a few pretty tough games in Big 12 standards. But I think, if they went 10-2, I wouldn't be shocked if Jalen Daniels was the quarterback. Now, if he doesn't play, I think all bets are off, and it wouldn't shock me if they win 5 games.
Right. I think his health determines which Kansas team ends up in the Big 12 title game. If he's unhealthy, I think Kansas State has a really good shot. And I think, those two are going to be vying for the second spot. You'll find out later who I have in the other spot, because I think they're going to win the whole thing. But Kansas State is another one. Little Manhattan, the little apple. And they're another program of success. We talk about Utah. Kansas State is always in the picture. They're never in the playoff contention. That they've flirted with it a couple of times, but they're always right there, and they're always a tough out. Are we going to get that same Kansas State team this year?
I mean, you got to. It's just that system. Chris Kleiman is an absolute animal, and it's kind of funny the parallel between those two Kansas schools, getting coaches that had a ton of success in the Division II, the FCS ranks, and inserting them in, and then just instantly having success and rebuilding programs. Leipold was at Buffalo when they grabbed him, but he had his roots back to the FCS. And then, I mean, you look at what Washington just did with Kalen DeBoer. DeBoer started his career at NAIA. And so it's becoming a trend of these schools going after these coaches that have had a lot of success in championships in those lower divisions. And Kleiman's rebuild has been really impressive. I'm still more impressed by Leipold's rebuild at Kansas just because of how much worse of a spot and how much of a laughingstock and a joke Kansas was.
Right.
Kansas State was at least in a fantastic program spot because of all the work that Snyder had been putting in those last however many years he was there. But great. Just a great system, and I think that's a team you can expect to be there every single year, basically.
Yeah, I think Bill Snyder was at Kansas State as long as Cam Rising's been at Utah. It's almost the same.
Close. Yeah, close. He used all his COVID eligibility.
So Dylan Edwards transferred from Colorado, and I believe he originally committed to Kansas State out of high school and then flipped his. Am I wrong to think that Dylan Edwards is just going to be Deuce Vaughn reincarnated? I know he might not start, and DJ Giddens is there. But am I wrong to think that Dylan Edwards might, be used in a similar role of Deuce Vaughn?
What I will say is Dylan Edwards is freaky fast. And I remember there was that play against Nebraska on that like wheel route where they swung it out to Edwards, and it was like, oh, they're going to get him. They're going to get him. They didn't get him. They did touchdown. So that guy is insanely fast. I wish he would have been used a little more at Colorado last year. I don't know if that was a health thing down the stretch, but I remember his usage kind of went down as the year went on. Giddens will be the primary back, but certainly I think if Edwards is able to establish, some sort of starting edge there, they're going to run the football a lot between Edwards, between Giddens, and Avery Johnson's also a dual threat. So there certainly will be opportunities for him to step up, but he's definitely a beast.
Well, and I think to add to that, I think Edwards brings something to the game that Deuce Vaughn also did, and that's the passing game. I mean, he can work in the screen game. He can catch the ball downfield. He had some pretty good catches, and having that as a running back is huge and key because defenses are keying on personnel. And if Dylan Edwards walks out there and he can't catch, I know there you go, a run, or he's just going to sit back there like they're not going to do any fakes. It's not going to help. But if you have a guy who can also get out and be a threat, I mean, that's just one more person you have to guard. And like you're saying, Avery Johnson, who can run, everybody in that backfield can catch and everybody in that backfield can run. It's really hard as a defense to key on somebody.
And speaking of Avery Johnson, I'll just bring this up in case it didn't come up otherwise. I had a video of like me asking Avery Johnson a question at Big 12 Media Day. It wasn't even a crazy question. I think I was asking like how Will Howard's mentorship helped him last year. And it literally got like 3 million impressions on Twitter, not for any football related reasons. It was people saying like, hey, this looks like the little girl from Remember the Titans or whatever. And like just jokes about his hair. And I was just like, come on, man, what are we doing here?
That's pretty awesome. So,
they don't respect the ball knowledge.
Do you feel old? He was the daughter in Remember the Titans, and now he's the starting quarterback.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you feel old?
Hey, if that's true, I feel old. I mean, I am older than him. So that makes me feel old, being older than college football players now.
Asking
that is weird.
20-year-olds.
I thought about that last year sitting on my couch.
Yeah. So I have another question I want to ask. So there were 4 newbies last year: BYU, Cincinnati, Houston, and who am I forgetting? UCF, that one. Last year they combined for like 9 wins in conference. Like it was what we expected. You move from a group of 5 program, I guess BYU was independent, to a Power 5 program. This year 2, who do you think takes the biggest jump out of those 4?
Yeah, and I think it's safe to say BYU was group of 5 because they had 5 power opponents last season or the season before they joined, and then they jumped to 10 when they were in the Big 12. So a huge jump for them. And seeing them all struggle was exactly what I expected. It's exactly the reason I'm a little lower on SMU this season. But in year 2, when I look for a jump, I look for who was the most active in their recruiting and who has upgraded their recruiting and who really went after it in the portal. And to me, that's UCF. I think UCF absolutely killed it this offseason. Their spring transfer portal work alone was filthy. They're recruiting better than their school ever has. I really think they're in a great position. If they can even have net positive line of scrimmage play, I think UCF is a sleeper to win the conference or at least be in that conversation, which you can say about a lot of schools in here, to be fair. But I don't know if BYU is going to be ready, especially at the line of scrimmage. Houston is definitely not going to be ready. They are in a terrible spot. I love Willie Fritz, their new coach, but they definitely are going to need time to rebuild things. Cincinnati interests me a little bit. They have some like several all-conference caliber players. I think about that sometimes, but UCF would be the easy choice for me.
I can't wait to see KJ Jefferson in powder blues. I cannot wait to see that big old boy playing quarterback. He is going to be fun to watch in the Big 12. That is what I'm most excited about, and I was going to pick them too. And then Penny Boone is not bad as well, running back from Maryland, I believe. So yeah, UCF would have been my pick.
Toledo's where Penny Boone.
Toledo. You're right.
Well, Penny Boone went on an adventure. He initially portaled from Toledo to Louisville, and then that was one of those aforementioned spring portal additions. UCF lured him away from Louisville back to UCF, so they really got active. And yeah, the KJ addition is also one to get really excited about.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see KJ Jefferson because we saw what he did at Arkansas. Now the team around him usually wasn't good enough to help with everything that he was able to do. I mean, playing in the SEC, it's just a different grind, absolutely different grind than being, UCF. And you look at, for instance, their schedule. They go Colorado, Florida, Cincinnati, Iowa State, BYU, Arizona. Way easier than the SEC giving you Alabama and Florida State, or Alabama and Florida and LSU and Ole Miss in like back-to-back weeks. This is a much easier way to go through, and you can breathe on some of these and understand that, they start their first games with New Hampshire and Sam Houston State. Sam Houston State obviously just moved to FBS. Not very good last year. You got to think that that's an easy 2-0 for them to really get their feet wet and get some momentum rolling.
Yeah, definitely.
But Cincinnati was an interesting one because we saw what Luke Fickell did with them. They went to the college football playoff. While they didn't really ever get too competitive with Alabama, they didn't get blown out of the water. They didn't give up 40 points like a lot of people thought they might do. They had, Kobe Bryant, they had Sauce Gardner. You saw the talent that was at Cincinnati, and, he left. They go get Scott Satterfield. I'm not super high on Scott Satterfield. I'd love to hear your opinion on him.
One of the best parts about being at Media Day is the random interactions with coaches and players that you just don't expect, like out of structure, not even at the press conference. And I ran into Scott Satterfield at Big 12 Media Days. We had like a 10-minute conversation, not even about football. We were just talking about like the weather and Cincinnati, and his daughter goes to GCU over here in Arizona. So he was asking me about Arizona a little bit. And it was a pleasant conversation. I wish nothing but the best for those guys this year. But definitely not thrilled with the way things panned out in year one for them at Cincinnati. And I was really high on his defensive coordinator, whose name is escaping me. I think his last name's like Brown or something like that. He left this offseason. So they are having to rebuild their staff. The only thing that gives me pause when talking about the Bearcats is they do have several, as I mentioned before, all conference caliber players. They've got Luke Kandra on that offensive line. They've got Corey Kinner out of the backfield at running back. They have a young guy in Brennan Sorsby who could be an excellent young weapon. So there are some weapons that make you think Cincinnati could flip some of those games and they could turn into a successful season. But because of how poorly that first year went, I'm not exactly thinking they're going to, set the world on fire this year.
Important question. Does he like the Cincinnati airport more than Louisville's airport? Did you at least get that squared away?
The one tidbit I got out of him from Cincinnati is he said he thinks Cincinnati, it counts as the South.
Oh, that's a good question.
Well, so Cincinnati's airport's located in Kentucky. So he actually, when he flew from, Louisville to Cincinnati, you actually don't even leave the state. You stay in the state of Kentucky.
What's it, Hendon? What's the airport? How do you pronounce it? The airport you use for Cincinnati that's in Kentucky.
It's called Northern Kentucky Airport.
Is it called Northern Kentucky? Well, hot dog. I was right there on it. What's the city it's in?
I forget what it's called. It's in It's right across the border in Northern Kentucky. So it's actually
Cincinnati the South though? I don't think it is.
That seems like a stretch to me. I'd never heard of that.
When I was in Cincinnati, I didn't see a lot of fried chicken. I didn't see a lot of sweet tea. I saw some people that were in good shape. So I don't know, Jake. Didn't feel like home to me.
One player we haven't talked about out of the Big 12 that I think is going to make a name for himself because he's out of the MAC is Daquan Finn going to Baylor. Daquan Finn was a monster in the MAC and was arguably the best quarterback, if not one of the top 2 or 3 for sure, and just seemed to find a way to make plays. And I want to hear your thoughts on Daquan Finn going to Baylor and Dave Aranda kind of coaching for his job after the last couple of years being a little bit viewed as failures ever since he, won the Big 12.
Definitely. I mean, yeah, last couple seasons were extremely disappointing. I mean, he's in scramble mode. They essentially extended him, one more year. You got to figure it out. It feels very much like the Sam Pittman thing. He had to shake up his staff, literally just to keep his job. He fired Jeff Grimes, their offensive coordinator, who's now actually the OC at Kansas. And they bring in Jake Spavital, who I believe was Cal's offensive coordinator. So a lot of staff shakeup. That offense will look a little different this year. And Daquan Finn's a beast. I loved him at Toledo. I thought he was an absolute monster, but we'll see how that translates from Group of 5 to Power 5, because sometimes that transition isn't extremely smooth. We've seen it work out great, though, in a portal era where quarterbacks get poached left and right. So it'll be really interesting. They've got some definitely talented players like Monterey Baldwin at receiver, Richard Reese at running back. They've got a solid amount of production. So if the scheme is sound this year, they're coaching for their lives, they get it together. Baylor's kind of a sleeper, I think, to start to rise a little faster than one might think they can get back on their feet.
And one of the
Oklahoma State, who's kind
of I was about to bring him up because we haven't even talked about Ollie Gordon, who might be the best player in the whole conference.
But I think right now they have the huge cloud over their program, because of what's happened the last couple of weeks. And instead of like everyone talking about how good and how promising they are coming into this year, that's what people are talking about. But now you're kind of like, you don't hear them in the conversation for the Big 12 championship anymore. At least I'm not. Like, I'm hearing Kansas, I'm hearing Kansas State, I'm hearing Utah. Like, Oklahoma State, are they still in it? Like, is there going to be a rift, or I think Ollie Gordon's going to be fine. Obviously, he's not going to be punished. He's going to be punished by getting more playing time.
Yeah, Oklahoma State's a weird team, man. I mean, I've been pretty notoriously a little lower on them this season going into this year, which seems weird because on paper, you look at them in the Big 12 title game last season, they have a ton of returning production. They return like 21 of their 22 starters. So it's like, what's not to like about this team? And what I don't like is look at last season. That was the weirdest season I've ever seen in my life. They got blown out by 27 at home to South Alabama. They had like 4 one-score wins in there. Every loss they had was a blowout. They had like a random 42-point loss to UCF in like either late October or November, and they still have issues at quarterback. It's still Alan Bowman, who's turnover prone. He makes inaccurate throws all the time. Yes, their offensive line is good. Ollie Gordon's great, but there's a lot that I'm really concerned about. Their defense was extremely lucky and able to force turnovers last year, but they gave up, I think, like they were like 12th in yards, like given up. They were like one of the worst in the conference last year. There's a lot of red flags with Oklahoma State, despite like the shiny, like overarching trends, like, the Ollie Gordons. And so that's the reason I'm a little lower on them. But I understand why Oklahoma State fans are like, well, you guys don't know. We're Oklahoma State. People sleep on us every year. We're going to go back to the Big 12 title game. So I can understand both sides, but I'm kind of erring on the side of caution with those guys this year.
Well, people used to sleep on them because Texas and Oklahoma were right there. They're not there anymore. So there's no excuse for them to be slept on anymore. At this point, going forward, if they're being slept on, it's because they're melatonin.
They went through 2 stretches last year where they beat Arizona State, get wiped by South Alabama, lose on the road by 7 points to Iowa State, and then come back and beat Kansas State. And then later in the year, they beat Oklahoma, which was hard enough last year, and then just get absolutely waxed by UCF by 42 points. That game, I think, should be highlighted as one of the weirdest games for last year, because how do you go and beat Oklahoma and then just like forget how to play football the very next week?
It's literally Mike Gundy's blood magic. He pulls it out every year.
Yeah. Culture.
Yeah.
Well, we can't talk about his blood anymore because now, based off of his comments, his blood.
His BAC,
we cannot touch his blood alcohol.
He might be getting some. He might be getting some blood in his alcohol content. I don't know.
That was so hilarious, man.
That comment was completely. I wasn't even weirded out by it or confused by it because I was like, oh, it's Mike Gundy. Like, that's just stuff he says.
I put it out there, and I honestly believe this is what he was doing. I think he was taking the heat off of Ollie Gordon. I think he wanted people talking about him. And I mean, he's not a dumb guy. Sometimes he does some weird things, but he knows how to bring the attention to himself. I mean, he's done it before in a lot more like upfront manner where he's like, I'm a man, I'm 40. Yeah. This is more, low key and kind of manipulative. I think that's honestly what he's doing. Like now people are just talking about him, and the whole Ollie Gordon thing has kind of just been brushed under the rug. That's
an excellent point. I didn't think about it like that, but I think that's actually a very real possibility with how these guys are used to handling media, basically.
Yeah, Mike Gundy knows that while he's not like completely untouchable, he's not very far off, and that he knows where he can tiptoe the line and keep going. And I think he understands of like, okay, maybe this is too far, or if I just issue a public apology, it all goes away. I think he understands where he's at. So obviously the playoff expanded to 12 teams this year. The Big 12 is going to have at least one team in. First, how many teams right now do you think make the playoff from the Big 12? And who would you say are the most legitimate contenders from the conference?
It's really tough because answering that question involves answering how many will the Big Ten get in? How many will the SEC get
I
in?
understand
How
it's
many?
not an easy question, but
Yeah. But
that's what we're
I
here for.
honestly think the most likely number you're looking at for the Big 12 is 2. If there was an over under out there, I think it would be over under 1.5, and then
I
it would be
agree.
juiced towards the over probably. And I think Utah's probably the main legitimate one you're talking about. They've been the closest, at least in a 4-team playoff era. No offense to TCU, they did actually make it. But I don't think TCU is one of the top contenders this year. But the other one I would say I would put up there would be Kansas State, because of what Chris Kleiman has, because of the potential ceiling under Avery Johnson at the helmet quarterback. So those would be my 2 top legit playoff contenders if I had to pick just 2.
Do you think West Virginia has any sort of a shot of backdooring their way into this? They have a very tough schedule, but I think Garrett Green is underrated as a quarterback around the country.
You're 100% right about that. I mean, if I had to make a long list of teams that could possibly make the playoff out of the Big 12,
It's like half the conference because
yeah, I would
just
throw
don't know
Kansas
what
in
you're
there.
getting.
Exactly. I'd throw Oklahoma State in there. I'd throw UCF as a dark horse. I'd throw West Virginia as a dark horse. What about TCU? They literally were in the national title game 2 years ago. You got to throw them in there. I think the only teams I would exclude really would be like Arizona State, Colorado, Houston, maybe Baylor as well. But even Baylor, it's like Dave Aranda's done it before. Could he do it again? That could be good. I don't know. It's kind of a tough choice. I also really like Iowa State this year.
I was going to ask you about Iowa State because they're getting a lot of love. So the preseason poll for the Big 12 was released, and they came in 6th. They were the first team that didn't get any first place votes because the first 5, Arizona, Kansas, Oregon, or Oklahoma State, Kansas State, and Utah all got first place votes. It just kind of shows that nobody really knows what's going to happen. Iowa State was the 6th team. We all know what Matt Campbell has done. That program a decade ago, nobody wanted to be there. They couldn't last more than 3 seasons without firing their coach. Matt Campbell's been there a long time. What do you see in Iowa State that you think that they could be in that top half, that top 5, top 6 this year?
Admittedly, I have Iowa State in my Big 12 title game, mostly because I'm a little sick in the head. But I love their returning. Yeah, I love their returning production. I think they're the anti-Oklahoma State. Last year, they ended up going 7-6, and I think that they were way better than their record indicated. They navigated that betting scandal and were without their quarterback for the start of the season, so they ended up dropping 2 of their first 3. So yeah, they had a lot of early turmoil that people kind of forgot about. You look at their 3 conference losses, 2 of them were to Oklahoma and Texas, who are no longer here. And they also had impressive wins over Kansas State and Oklahoma State. So talk about 2 of the current contenders and 2 teams you don't got to worry about anymore. They had the most freshman snaps of any team last year. So they were extremely young, and it's a team that develops extremely well. So if I'm going to take a shot in a team, it's going to be a team like that, where I feel like people's stock is way disproportionately lower on them than they actually are. And so are they most likely to make the Big 12 title game? No, but do I think that's a lot of bang for your buck on betting on a team? I think absolutely with Iowa State.
You'll see where I agree with you later on. And then I have 3 names, Jake, that I think are a really good reason why Iowa State can compete. And that's Rocco Becht, Abu Sama III, and I always forget his name, Jalen Noel. Jalen Noel, who is a kick returner, punt returner for them, big play, wide receiver. He's going to be huge. But Abu Sama, I think, is a dark horse candidate for the Walter Payton Award. I mean, I think, or Doug Walker Award, excuse me. He is an extremely good running back. And just like, Dylan Edwards that we talked about earlier, he's great out of the backfield with catching the ball. So, and Rocco Becht started last year. He's a younger guy. He's got a great name, probably the best name for a quarterback in the entire NCAA. So that gives him some props right there. So yeah, I'm pretty high on Iowa State as well. And I think their season hinges on that defense. Can their defense hold up against some of these high scoring offenses that they're going to have to go up against? But one thing that I focused on too, and I'll hit on this again later, they have a pretty easy schedule. They have the 45th ranked schedule in terms of strength of the schedule. So pretty mid of the pack. So they have a shot against everybody they're playing essentially. And I also want to hit on this, Jake, not to backtrack us a little bit too much, but West Virginia's quarterback, Garrett Green. I love Garrett Green. I think if we want to see West Virginia take that next step and compete to win the Big 12, he's got to get that completion percentage up. I think last year he was completing about 55 or 56% of his passes. If he can stay at that 60% range, I think West Virginia's offense could be pretty potent, especially with his ability to run the football.
Absolutely. I agree with you there. And we get to see what West Virginia's made of right out of the chute because they host Penn State week 1, rematch of last year. And a little bit different. This year it's in, Morgantown. West Virginia's got a little bit more experience. Drew Aller had this best game of the year last year against West Virginia in the first game of the year, and then everything dipped down. But we'll see what happens there. I think Morgantown's going to be probably pretty hectic. This is probably one of the biggest games come to Morgantown in the last few years, and they don't get to host Penn State too often. So I wanted to go to that game so bad because I'm not very far away, but instead I'm traveling to Vermont for a freaking wedding, and I'm not happy about that.
Hey, I'll be in Vermont.
Not happy.
Next month too, man.
Yeah, well, you're not going on the first weekend of college football.
Yeah,
Nope,
fall weddings, nasty stuff, man.
Yeah, luckily it's on the Sunday, so I get to spend all Saturday watching the game, so I can at least do that.
Okay. There we go.
I missed the one Sunday. Yeah, we'll show up
and fall weddings, people.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
We'll plug in our merch when we go back in stock after my wife makes more. So before we get into who we think is going to be in the championship game, we want to talk about our walk-on team of the year, our dark horse. Will, who's your walk-on team of the year?
Yeah, and just to give you a little bit of context, our walk-on team of the year is the dark horse candidate to win the to win the conference. And like we alluded to not too long ago, mine is Iowa State. And I already kind of gave my preview on it. I love Rocco Beck, Abu Sama III, Jalen Noel. They're lethal. And the fact that you have a legitimate target at wide receiver, a legitimate target at running back, and then obviously a quarterback who's been there and was in big games last year, like you alluded to, like they played Oklahoma, they played Texas. They're in pretty intense environments, and there's no better teacher than experience. And with that year under his belt, that's going to take them into this year. He's an experienced guy. They can look to him. They have a good core on that offense. And like I said, the defense, I just want to see the defense take that next step. And I mean, I would not be shocked to see them in there. I love Matt Campbell. He is one of my favorite coaches. I love his approach to the game. I love his quote. I think it was last year, or maybe it was earlier this year, when he talked about potentially leaving Iowa State, and he just said he couldn't do it because they preach to their kids. I think he did it on Josh Pate's show. They preach to their kids all the time, being loyal, being truthful to everybody and showing up every day. And he goes, how can I leave here if I'm sitting here telling the kids that? He's talked about one of the biggest issues with coaches nowadays is we want to get mad at kids for jumping ship when they'll do the same thing when they get an opportunity. And he doesn't want to be about that. And I think that's going to pay off for him over in Ames, Iowa. It's not a destination city, but it is if you're going to go play for the Cyclones and for Matt Campbell. And just because of him and that leadership, I think this team has a really good shot to be a legitimate title contender in the Big 12.
Who's yours, CFBudge? Who's your dark horse you think that might have a chance? Now, I'm not letting you have Iowa State. You already alluded to that.
That's completely fine. We've touched on a lot of schools, but if I had to pick one that has a special place in my heart, I'd go with Texas Tech. I think the Red Raiders have been just knocking on the door under Joey McGuire. I think the dude is one of the more underrated coaches, and that's just because he hasn't had that breakout signature, whatever you want to call it. They've just had really slow starts the last couple of years, followed by really strong finishes. And those strong finishes are encouraging. They're recruiting at a high level. They've got a key amount of production back. I think Baron Morton is a quarterback that puts them in a position to succeed. And then Taj Brooks at running back. And you look at some of the guys that bring in, obviously Micah Hudson's the exciting 5-star. Texas Tech's a team that every year people say about them, it feels like, or at least the last several seasons, preseason top 25 buzz, Big 12 dark horse, and then they win 7 or 8 games. This year, why not? They're my walk-on team of the year. I think they can make something happen.
Yeah, how did we go this long without mentioning Taj Brooks? That's a disservice. Shout out to Taj Brooks. Shout out to my first overall draft pick on the 3 Technique college football fantasy pick. That was my number 1 pick.
I got this poker chip with Taj Brooks' face on it from Big 12 Media Days. It's got a QR code from Taj Brooks. He, if you scan the QR code, it tracks his progress towards becoming the all-time Texas Tech rushing yards leader. So I thought
that's pretty sweet.
Cool.
That's really cool.
That's pretty sweet. I like Joey McGuire. Joey McGuire as well, because you think back less than a decade ago, he was a high school coach. He had been, coaching in Texas high school football. And to me, when he already had those kind of relationships going to Texas Tech, obviously all the top kids, they're Texas A&M, and you're going to have every other program, Oklahoma, Alabama, that's going to be coming into Texas trying to take those kids. But when you get to tier 2, I mean, not that's like always Micah Hudson enrolled, but tier 2, being able to swoop in and just take all these kids from Texas. We saw it happen at Houston when Tom Herman was there, being able to lock down, the Houston area. We're seeing SMU try to do that with the Dallas area. Now, Lubbock obviously isn't in a super populous area, but him having that experience coaching Texas high school football and understanding what that is, I think in the long run, that's going to continue to pay off for him. And I think he's just going to continue to get talent, because in the state of Texas, you don't need to leave to go get other players. There's so many kids in that state. You don't even need to look around to other states. If you can just get 25 kids out of the state of Texas that are probably 3 and 4 stars, you're going to build a really good class. And I think for the long term of what the Big 12 is, I think he's got a really good chance to build something there at Texas.
Yeah. And Jake, I want to add to that too. Like I think everything's cyclical. And like I talked about it earlier in the episode, recruiting is nationwide now. But I think because of what you're saying in the relationships and because of NIL, we might see players start to flip back to staying local, staying home. Because what's the most important part of building a relationship and building a brand is knowing people, relationships. And no one knows you more than the people right there in your backyard. So I think if Texas Tech and Joey McGuire, if he's already has those relationships, he's got relationships with brands as well. And now he can convince these guys that are right there in that area, hey, stay here. I know the car dealership. I know, the big oil company that can help you out. I know the Lambo company that Sarkeesian uses over in Austin. I'm jesting a little bit, but in all seriousness, like I think we can see that flip. If guys have those relationships in that community, we'll see people stay.
I alluded to my team already, but my walk-on team of the year in the Big 12 is going to be West Virginia. They returned their whole offensive line, and I don't think I can understate how important that is to me when looking at teams, because returning a whole offensive line, that chemistry, and it's not like they were bad. Like they were honestly they did an overall pretty good job, and I think Garrett Green coming back as quarterback, I think they've done a pretty good job recruiting and bringing in some quality players on that offensive side. The problem I have is that their schedule is not that easy. Like I said, they started with Penn State. Now that's a non-conference game, so it doesn't impact them. They go to Pitt, but they also have Kansas, Oklahoma State, Kansas State, and Arizona. 4 teams that we have already said that could be contending for them.
Don't skip over Albany. Albany was in the FCS semifinals last year. That's no joke of a game, especially sandwiched between the backyard brawl and the Penn State game.
Home of Jared Verse.
Yeah, Jared Verse came from Albany, so we know that they can produce talent. And you look at this, and every team on their schedule, with the exception of, maybe Cincinnati, we've talked about as being a potential contender here in the Big 12 between Kansas, Oklahoma State, Iowa State, Kansas State, Arizona, Baylor, UCF, and Texas Tech. There's no real gimme wins on this schedule. So at the same time, this might backfire and they might win 4 games, but I think that they could make some noise and really, shoot up these rankings here towards the end of the year, especially if they get on a roll here in October and, maybe knock off Kansas State at home. Before we finish up here, want to get picks, at least who you think will be in the Big 12 championship game, 4 or 5 months from now, first week of December. Who is playing for the Big 12 championship? And I don't even know where it's played this year. I don't know if they're still playing in Dallas or if they moved it around.
I think it's in Dallas, yeah. Again.
William, want to go first?
Yeah, I can lead off. So I have Arizona. I think Arizona will be there. And my runner-up, I think Arizona has a really good shot to win it. My runner-up is between Utah, Kansas, and Kansas State. And I think to be safe, I'm going to go Utah. I think it's Utah versus Arizona. And I think that Arizona offense is just going to be too potent. They're going to be able to run through these Big 12 defenses. They have the easiest schedule out of all the teams in the Big 12. They have one of the easiest in the entire Power 4. And I think that's going to help them out a lot. You alluded to the coaching hires they had. Yes, it sucks that Jedd Fisch left. I know I called him Jeff Fish earlier. I was thinking of Jeff Fisher, but I know Jedd Fisch left and went to Washington. But the fact that Fafita and McMillan stayed, the core of that offense is still there. The nucleus of the leadership for the players is still there, and I think that's going to pay huge dividends. But I would not be shocked to see Utah win it either. But Arizona's going to be my pick. Sign, seen, delivered in blood. That's what I got.
CFBudge, who you got?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Utah, and I'm going to go with Iowa State. All the reasons I talked about for the Cyclones and for the Utes, I think they've just been there, done that. I think they're in a great spot. Cam Rising's back. Even if he has health concerns again, they have Brandon Rose behind him, and they even went out and landed another guy that can back him up. I'm not remembering who that is at this moment, but I just think they're in a great spot, and I like the Utes to win the Big 12 this season. And I honestly, out of all the conferences, I think I am most confident that Utah will be the Big 12 champions this year.
I like that.
Sam Heward is who you're thinking of. He was the former Washington, transferred to Cal Poly, and now he's back playing FCS for Utah. He was a 5-star quarterback that just really never panned out, but there's some talent there still.
Solid insurance, even as a third string, but they needed it last year.
Yeah, they really did. So I'm going to be boring. I'm going to take Utah and Kansas State. I know those are the two favorites, but I just think when the dust settles, you're going to see these two teams rise to the top. I think Chris Kleiman and Kyle Whittingham are just two of the best coaches in college football. They tend to do more with less. These aren't the schools that are bringing in the 5 stars every year. They're not Alabama. They're not Ohio State. They're not Florida State and Texas bringing in these top-tier talent, but they find a way to develop guys. They keep guys on their roster. A lot of these guys have been there. Chris Kleiman hasn't been, afraid to make changes. There's a reason why Will Howard left. I know Will Howard went to Ohio State, but Avery Johnson was really good, and they were comfortable with that. And Cam Rising, I think Cam Rising has a chance to make a lot of noise. I don't think Cam Rising has enough to be like a Heisman Trophy contender. I think he plays a little too chaotic and a little too erratic and doesn't put up the Heisman caliber stats that would be needed to actually win the award. But I think he is the definition of just a gamer. He finds ways to win. He does it with his legs. He puts his body on the line, maybe a little too often sometimes. But I really like that Cam Rising is back. And I'm blanking on their tight end who also
Grant Keithy.
Yeah, that was who also took a year off to hang out with Cam Rising in the dorm and get ready for the new college football game. That's what they were spending all year doing. They were practicing.
Speaking of him being a gamer, I'll always think of Cam Rising. Anytime someone says Cam Rising, I'll always think of the play against USC where he ran for that first down and just got rocked and then just kept on balling. I mean, love that dude. Game time decision, Cam Rising, baby. Who'd you pick to win? Who'd you pick to win?
That was electric.
Who'd I pick to win? Oh, I'm gonna be boring. I'll take Utah. I think when the dust settles, Cam Rising is just going to find a way to win. They are going to probably slip up to a game that they probably shouldn't. It just feels like Utah does that every year. Is that there's even if they're favored in every game, they're going to find a way to lose on the road at Houston or something. I think something will happen, something weird will happen. But I, for one thing, know Colorado won't be there. I'm like very confident in saying Colorado won't be there.
Well, they're playing in the Super Bowl every week.
They are. They are playing in the Super Bowl every week. They're everybody's Super Bowl. Well, CFBudge, we appreciate you being on here. Go ahead and plug all your social media. Make sure everybody knows where to find you.
Yeah, so it's CFBudge on everything, on TikTok, on Twitter, on Instagram, on YouTube. You'll find me there if you enjoy college football, short form video, long form video, random fleeting thoughts on Twitter. My preview magazine is linked in all the bio on my socials. There's a free digital version. So if you're not looking to spend any money and you want access to college football knowledge, that's all there. But thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate it.
Hey, speaking of that preview, did Josh Pate not give you a shout out? Did you get a shout out from Josh Pate on your preview magazine?
If I did, I'm not aware of it. So I don't know. I didn't see anything.
Well,
so
let's just say I gave a shout out as Josh Pate for you on your preview magazine. So
there we go. That'll work.
You heard it here first. Josh Pate, breaking news, shouts out CFBudge's college football preview magazine.
Well,
There we go.
appreciate you joining us. For everybody listening, make sure to follow, rate, subscribe, check out the walkonredshirts.com. We're also on TikTok. Well, I guess not really. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram at the Walk On Red Shirts. And thanks again to CFBudge for joining us. And we'll be back next week. I think we're doing Big Ten next week, William?
Big Ten.
We're back with first half. Big Ten will be split into two because there's way too many big names in
Big
the Big
25.
Ten. So, Big 25. So we'll be back next week, and we'll see you all then.